Are you ready to explore the unknown? Dive into the world of the strange, mysterious, and unexplained with Eerie Expeditions magazine. Each issue is packed with spine-tingling tales, cutting-edge paranormal investigations, and exclusive insights into hauntings, cryptids, UFOs, and more. Whether you're a seasoned investigator or just love a good ghost story, Eerie Expeditions magazine has something for you. Join our growing community of truth seekers and adventure lovers. Subscribe today at EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com and unlock the secrets of the supernatural. Are you ready? That's EerieExpeditionsMagazine.com, where the extraordinary is just a click away. Dare to discover.
Welcome to The Gateway, broadcast live from United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM. We're live from the Mojave, where the strange slips through the cracks. And I'm your host this evening, C.L. Thomas. Tonight on The Gateway podcast, I'm joined by curator and founder John Kozik from Salem Witch Board Museum to discuss the history of the Ouija board. But before we get into that, you've been listening to Sean Kelly with Into the Night right here on United Public Radio. If you missed his show, tune in again on Sunday nights at 5 p.m. Pacific. I hope everyone is doing well. I see a couple people trickling in. I had an odd thing happen to me out in the desert this weekend, and I just want to tell you guys about it real quick before I have my guest on. So I was out in a place called Rhyolite doing some nighttime photography, a little side hobby of mine. And the town of Rhyolite, it's one of those boom towns that, it boomed and then busted within just a few years, and it just is 2 hours from Las Vegas. And what makes this little town significant is it has a number of old structures and ruins that are left over that you can go and walk through and things like that. With the full moon, I wanted to get a show of the moon rising over the building. So I had my camera set up on a tripod on the roof of my car. I had a cable with a timer that I had my camera on, and I just kind of, after I had everything set up, I had a remote controller in my hand and just kind of sat in a chair next to my car and just waited. And as I did this, I heard an audible voice coming from a building that was to the right of me by maybe 15 feet. And over there is like a 2-room jailhouse building. And let me show you the building here so you can see what I'm talking about. So you see the structure right here, and that's the jailhouse I'm talking about. I heard a voice coming out of that building, and it kind of echoed. It had like that echoey effect. So at first I thought, well, maybe somebody had walked up the path, and I hadn't noticed because I was too busy setting up the camera. So I walked around the building just to be sure, and there was no one there. So normally I don't get spooked easily. The vast desert, I spent a lot of time out there, and it's become actually, it's more comfortable for me out in the desert than it is in downtown Vegas these days, to tell you the truth. So I've been out in these places many, many times. It takes a lot to scare me. I was a little bit spooked. So after determining that indeed this was something paranormal going on, I started to record with a digital recorder and tried to use the new Innova box that I got from the Horn Paranormal. I don't have that with me, but on that box, I went into the little building there. You see, you can walk into it. And I asked, who was it that just talked? I heard you. Who was this? And, on that little Nova box, and this is a box that has 200,000 words. It works like a novelist, except for a novelist only has 2,000 words. This thing has 200,000. So out of 200,000 words, this thing says sheriff. Are you kidding me? So in the remains of this old jailhouse, I get, first I heard audibly a noise, and then I hear on the box, sheriff. And I have this on video. So I wrapped up my photography and I headed out. And on the way, I stopped at there's a two-story bank building in what is now in what used to be an old hardware store from the turn of the century. Both of these buildings are pretty intact still. And I'm sitting on the road in between those two buildings, and directly in front of me, maybe about 30 yards from me, is a two-story schoolhouse. And part of that schoolhouse, the side had caved in, so you can kind of see through the building almost, or into the building, I should say. So you can see like where the stairs were, that sort of thing. So I noticed that this bright light appeared, and it was like maybe the size of a basketball, and it was kind of bouncing around the ground floor of the schoolhouse. But this only lasted, it was one of those things where you realize what you're seeing and then all of a sudden it stops. It was one of those incidents. And I'm just sitting there going, are you kidding me? So I'm sitting there looking, and after about 10 minutes, this light starts again. And it's floating around the schoolhouse. It's actually moving inside the schoolhouse. And I'm sitting there thinking, are you kidding me? Am I really looking at this right now? And so I pull out my phone to try to get this thing recorded, and it stopped naturally. So I put my phone up on the dashboard, hit record, and started like filming again in hopes that this thing would happen again. And sure enough, it did. It showed up again, and this time it was a little bit higher. It was, what would have been the second story of this building. And that light, it almost looks like a lantern, like it flickers and then goes out, and that's it. And I caught this on video. So I don't want to play it right now because I don't want to take too much time away from my guest. I want to get the show started, but I'm going to post this video of this phantom light on my Facebook page. Now, it's a little fuzzy because the lens on my phone wouldn't focus directly on that light, but I think you'll get the idea of what I was looking at. So check that out when you get a minute. I'll post it later on tonight and tell me what you think. But anyway, back to the program. Tonight's guest, we're going to talk about, our discussion is from Parker Brothers to the Devil's Board. Joining me is John Kozik, founder and curator of Salem Witch Board Museum. Let me get him on here. John, welcome to the show.
Hello there. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm so honored to have you on. John, you wrote for the mag, or we had an article about the witch boards in Erie Expeditions magazine, and now here you are. I'm so excited to have you on.
Yes, we're going to talk about my favorite thing, Ouija boards.
There's a lot to discuss on this. First of all, tell me about how you got into collecting Ouija boards and why the Ouija.
Yeah, so I became interested in Ouija when I inherited my grandmother's Ouija board. She had learned from her grandmother, who was a spiritualist, and my grandmother could use the board very quickly. She could, the planchette would fly around, and she could yell out letters and numbers quicker than anyone could write down what she was saying. But her board looks like the very classic Ouija I think most of us think about, with the two couples in the corners and the sun and the moon. And when I went online to learn more about it, I was pretty surprised to find out that there were, hundreds, if not thousands, of other boards being produced. So that's when we start collecting them at first. And it took about 6 years of collecting before I finally met my friend Robert Murch, Rick Schreck, Calvin Von Crush. And we ended up all being collectors, but we ended up starting a group called the Talking Board Historical Society. So I'm part of a registered nonprofit who research, preserve, celebrate the history of these boards. And then my collection got so large that in 2019, I opened the Salem Witch Board Museum. And 2 years ago, I opened a second location in Baltimore. And I've left my job of 22 years just to talk about Ouija boards every day.
Full-time Ouija board discussions. I love it.
Yep.
So the Ouija board kind of has a bad, I always pronounce it incorrectly. So I apologize to everybody out there. It's pronounced Ouija, right?
It's Ouija, but
Ouija.
But when it came out, it had a patent which lasted for 16 years. So no one else could make a competing board against it. So if you ask someone if they use the board, you would ask them if they are Ouijaing. So you Ouija on a Ouija, you verb on the noun.
Gotcha. So tell me about this. We started out with this just being a simple parlor game, and everybody was doing it in the 70s. Basically, it was a fun game. Everyone was doing it. Everyone had one in their living room. And now there's a lot of places that have it banned. There's a lot of different haunted hotels and all sorts of other things that they will allow you to come investigate, but they will not allow you to use this board, the spirit board. How do we go from it being accepted in the culture to this overwhelming fear of it?
Well, I think the quick answer is, first of all, you're right that every house in America pretty much had a Ouija board in it. In 1967, it outsold Monopoly. And really, because of that popularity, it's why William Peter Blatty put it in the movie The Exorcist. So the horror movie in the early 70s, they explain how she becomes possessed is by using a Ouija board alone and not saying goodbye. And those two superstitions kind of stick. And those are pretty popular rules that a lot of people believe today. But those wouldn't be rules on the board prior to The Exorcist. But that really just plants very subliminally in people's brains, don't use them alone, always say goodbye. And I think also the Vietnam War ends just after The Exorcist. And that's really the last major U.S. war with a draft. So you have less people using the board the way it's intended to be used, which is communicating to your loved one, to now it's a dare game, a sleepover party game. And to me, the Ouija board's all about your intent. And I think most people's intent today is just to call a random number on a phone and ask, is there a spirit in the room? Where in the past, you were calling someone you were trying to connect with that you knew.
Well, how does that go to dialing up the devil, so to speak?
Well, I think it goes with your intent. And I think a lot of people are using it in that intent to be like, I think if you go looking for trouble on the Ouija board, you're certainly going to find trouble. And I think that's a lot of how people, their very first experience using it is that.
Gotcha. So is there a set rules that people should be following when they're using these things?
To me, my suggestion is the rules of your gut instinct. It's what you're comfortable doing. And just because you might believe certain rules, somebody else might not believe it. No one's wrong, but it'll work differently. You'll influence the board. So for instance, if you wanted to say a prayer or light a candle before you used it or sage the board, those are all things you should do. But for me, I think the Ouija board is really no different than a phone. And if you used my phone, I wouldn't sage it if you had a bad conversation on it. So really, I think it's your gut instinct, because at the end of the day, you have to use your instinct. Am I talking with the person who they claim they are, or I believe they are?
Has there ever been any instances that you heard of where somebody really did call up a demonic spirit of some sort?
I've heard people claim that, of course, but I think, I've plenty of stories. There's news stories of people, believing they're speaking to Satan, and they ask what they should do, and it tells them to kill somebody. Yeah, absolutely. I think that even if you get a bad phone call like that, you have free will, so you don't need to go kill somebody if the Ouija board told you, the person on the Ouija board told you to do it. But no, certainly, I think a lot of people are going to say they've had demonic conversations through the Ouija.
Interesting. So going back to the very beginning, I know this thing started way before the Vietnam War. So where did it start?
Yeah, it really has roots in spiritualism in America. So you're talking the mid 1800s, just post Civil War, where everyone's been affected by death, and really everyone wants to try to communicate with who they lost. And so it evolves over time, but in that time, people are doing seances and table tipping, pendulum, tarot, and they're using something called an automatic writing device, automatic writing planchette, which looks very similar to what you see on a Ouija board today. But back then it had a pencil and wheels in the front, and they would just channel a spirit to themselves, and they would write or draw on a piece of paper, whatever came through. Around the same time, people had been communicating with spirits. They heard knocking responses back to them, and it evolved from asking spirits yes and no questions, waiting for a knock or two, to eventually counting knocks to figure out what letter of the alphabet they were on, to then an alphabet board where they pointed to the alphabet and wait for a knock from the spirit to start spelling messages. So really, once that alphabet board and the automatic writing planchette combined, that's how we get them. And they're kind of homemade and evolving over time. And it's not until 1890 when a businessman in Baltimore, Charles Kennard, produces the first board, and he calls it a witch board, a very generic name. A few months later, a woman named Helen Peters asked it what it wanted to be called, and it spelled back Ouija. She asked, what does it mean? And the board spelled back good luck. So the board named itself, and then really Ouija becomes the first mass-produced board.
It's interesting. So Helen Peters, she never really has a face or a name until you kind of dug her out of the records. Isn't that right?
That's true. So Helen, she not only names the board, she's the sister-in-law to the person who patented the Ouija. And she went to the patent office with Elijah Bond, and no one wanted to sign off on the patent until finally the chief patent clerk said, well, I don't know you, you don't know me. If you can use the board, tell me my name, I'll give you the patent. And Helen, being a strong medium, used it, told him his name. That's how we got the patent for the Ouija. But yes, she was written out of history and really only rediscovered 12 years ago by Robert Murch, the president of the Talking Board Historical Society. He did some research and found these letters where people started talking about a woman who named the board, but they didn't mention her by name. So he really went down the rabbit hole for about 6 years, going through ancestry to census records to all these people that lived in this rooming house where the seance happened, only to say, oh, Helen Peters, oh, her sister married the guy who patented the Ouija. So yeah, 6-year rabbit hole, only rediscovered 12 years ago.
Was there anything strange that happened with William, the founder of this board?
So William Fold arguably is pretty synonymous to the Ouija. Him and his family, they produced it for close to 70 years. And he had used the Ouija, and it told him he should build a second factory in Baltimore. He built the factory. Sometime later, he was supervising the installation of a flagpole up on the roof, and he ended up falling off the roof, dying from his injuries. And on his deathbed, he told his family not to sell Ouija. We're not really sure what he meant. Don't sell the Ouija board or the Ouija brand. But 39 years to the day, on the anniversary of his death, that's the day the family did sell to Parker Brothers in Salem.
And that's how Parker Brothers ultimately gets this board.
Yep. They get it in 1966, pay $1 million, which is the most paid for a game at that point. And the following year is when it outsells Monopoly.
Has there been any allusion to there being a curse or anything like that on the family?
When I tell the story in the museum, I think a lot of people, they tend to be like, yeah, he got what he deserved or something like that. But I mean, that family made a lot of money off of the Ouija board. So I don't look at it as a negative thing in the sense it's the Ouija board. If anything, I think that the Ouija brought them a lot of good luck by being so popular.
Did you guys install the headboard in the cemetery that has the Ouija?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Elijah Bond, the person who patented the Ouija, Helen's brother-in-law, we found out I should say we were collectors at the time. We were all just friends. And Murch found out that Elijah was buried in an unmarked grave in Greenmount Cemetery, Baltimore. And we thought, that's really sad. Here's this guy patented this board, and he's not acknowledged in any way. So we helped raise money to put that headstone in, and it looks the way the patent looked like. It's pretty classic Ouija look, the alphabet, of course, sun and the moon. And the cemetery was resistant to having it in. They thought it was in poor taste. They couldn't stop us. We had the family's permission. But now that headstone is the most visited grave in the cemetery. And if you Google, Ouija headstone, you'll see it, or check out the magazine. Of course, there's a great picture of it in there.
Too bad there wasn't a planchette so that people can sit there and actually play on the board.
True. When we go there, people leave. They bring planchettes there, and yeah, so plenty of people do bring a Ouija board to use it there, and they leave little things behind like the planchette. So at least we know people are acknowledging it. At the time, it was just meant to bring recognition to this person. And now that we're a registered nonprofit, that now when we do these other things, we kind of think of those things ahead of time now.
Does the nonprofit ever experience any backlash from the community at all?
Actually, no, surprisingly not. We've been pretty well embraced. I think, if you're talking in the paranormal field where, some people are still, still have kind of negative association to the Ouija, I think that they still appreciate the fact that, hey, this is part of our paranormal history. The Ouija board is probably the most accessible tool people have used. Almost everybody has an experience using it. And no matter what you feel about it, you can't take away the history that it has with the paranormal. So no, to be honest with you, we've only had positive experiences that I can think of with anyone with the Ouija.
How do you go about educating people about the Ouija?
Yeah, I mean, well, of course, we'll go to conventions and we'll lecture and things like that. At the museum, I talk to people every single day, and I love doing that. I love being able to talk it out with people. And then again, it's everyone's a little bit different from each other. So when I get people that want to buy a Ouija board from me, I have to talk it out as to what they're comfortable with. And it could be that they want a board that's never been used, thinking that something might be attached to it. It could be a wooden board that's closer to the earth and works better than something made out of plastic. So kind of helping people get in their comfort zone as to what they think is going to work best for them is kind of what I'm gotten pretty good at lately.
So if I was to say, if I came to you and I said I wanted a board from the 1920s, is there such a thing?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, 1919 was a big change in the Ouija with the way it looks, with the little face in the left corner. So dating it to the 1920s isn't difficult, but, finding something in the right price for an antique board, that might be a different part of the story. So working within a price range, working on the size of the board. Most of those had two sizes. Finding the original planchette that usually was lost or broken. And some people have beliefs that it has to be the original planchette. It can't be a replacement. So those are all things that I talk out with people when they want to get a board.
Very, very cool. What is the oldest board that you have right now in the museum?
I have a board from 1890, and that's really the first board that Kennard made. He called it a witch board, just a very generic name. And a few months later, Helen named it Ouija. But it's one of only 5 known to exist today. And so pretty rare. And anything older than that, out in the wild would be homemade. And it would be pretty hard to date a homemade piece of wood that someone wrote the alphabet on. But my buddy Calvin, he has probably the oldest known board that we know of, 1886. He's got the family diary with it, a Bible. And so they talk about using it in there. So we feel pretty confident that that might be the oldest board that we know of.
And what does that look like?
Pretty interesting, actually. It has the alphabet around the perimeter of the board. So it is roughly 15 by 22 inches, but it has the all around the edge. So the planchette would kind of sit in the middle and not fall off the board. So kind of a cool design. It looks different than what we think of today with that double arch.
Is there anything, is there any energy associated with the different boards in the museum?
So I don't feel that way. Again, to me, these are phones and I don't feel that energy, but I do have a few boards in the museum that have been donated either to the Talking Board Historical Society or to the museum. And they were donated because the previous owners had a bad experience with them. And one of those boards in particular is the Stranger Things board, the TV show. They made merchandise for it and they sold a board back in 2017. And with that board, it was donated. The previous owner spent the $15, $20, mailed it. They didn't put a return address on the package. They only put a note in with the board, which basically said, if you find it, forward it to the Talking Board Historical Society. Trust me, you don't want it.
Really? Do you guys get a lot of objects like that?
Oh, yeah. So now that I have the museum, I come in some mornings, you're leaning against the door, dropping off like a fire station, dropping off a baby in the middle of the night. I have sometimes if I'm talking with guests in the museum, when they leave, I'll go up to the front counter to the register and someone's dropped one off with the clerk up there. Now, the TBHS has roughly 30 boards. And then on my own, I've probably had, 20 or 30 donated in the last couple of years. Yeah.
So what's been going on with the Stranger Things board?
So some people walk through past all the antique and vintage boards. They walk right to the Stranger Things board, and they tell me they feel something with it. And but the weird thing that happens pretty consistently is photography of it. So people take a picture with, it used to be film, where they'd go home and develop the film. Every picture came out fine, but a few times, 4 times in 3 years, the picture of the Stranger Things board specifically would be the only picture that came back all crazy blurry. And not just like out of focus. I mean, like someone took the phone and went by really quick and took it like that. But then it switched over to Polaroids being blurry. Polaroids where people wrote to me and said, John, there's something in the picture that wasn't there the day before. Then cell phone pics being blurry. And then recently, someone tried to take a picture of it. Their cell phone screen was black and white pixelated. Couldn't see the board. You could see the sign above it, but not the board. Some people would be pitch black on their phone screen. They could see the sign above it, but not the board. Just the other day, I had someone send me pictures in the mail when they developed them. They came back, and they're interesting with that story the other day was I didn't tell them any stories before they took those pictures. They took them, and they told me that afterwards I talk about people feeling uncomfortable in the space, getting headaches or pressure on their head, pins and needles in their forehead, pressure on their sinuses, getting sick, and those kind of things. And they swear that before I said anything, they were already starting to feel that way. And when they took the picture of the person on the couch, which is right next to the Stranger Things board, it looks like someone took the camera like in a circle. It's like crazy, like swirl. But those are just some of the things. But there's a lot of stuff with that. But the Stranger Things board specifically, that's probably the one with the most energy that people feel something with.
Is that because can each of these boards, since they act like a telephone almost, are they connecting, like maybe it's like a one-way line to a specific spirit? Is it tied to like one specific, like how does one specific spirit get tied to one board?
Yeah, I don't think that. Personally, I think you could grab any board in the museum and talk to, the same spirit through any of those devices. But I think what happens is some people use the board and things work for them a certain way, and then they only want to use that again. They don't want to try something else because they're like, well, this worked for me in the past. I don't want to mix things up. So I think that's where a lot of people start thinking like, this is the only board I can use to communicate with the spirit I've been talking with.
So it wouldn't be true that if you, like say I want a 1920s board, and my theory is because it's been used so much throughout the century that maybe it has a little more connection to the other world. So that might not be true.
Well, I'd say it's true if you believe it. You know what I mean? Like if you start thinking something's going to work better for you than something else, then I think you might influence the board in that way. I mean, I meet people who want a brand new board because they're afraid something's attached to it. They don't want anything else, any other conversations. So again, if you start believing it worked better, it probably would.
That leaves it open to a lot of interpretation now. So you had Rockwell, Norman Rockwell actually painted some kids using a Ouija board.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty famous picture. It made it to the cover of the Saturday Evening Post back in 1920. And he had been at a party out in Long Island, saw this couple using it, and painted it for that magazine cover. But when you go to the museum in Salem, I have a lot of other items from 1920, and it really puts it in a different perspective because the Ouija board was mainstream. It was very popular. It was on the cover of Popular Science with instructions on how to make a board, Pictorial Review. Probably literally about a dozen magazines in 1920 would put the Ouija on the cover. And that same year, there would be about a dozen songs written about it. Most of those were love songs. But, when people come to the museum, that usually surprises people is to see just how it was viewed in 1920 specifically. Kids were using it, couples, women using them alone, which, before The Exorcist, women would use them alone. During a war, men were off fighting and women were often using them alone. So I think that is pretty eye-opening to a lot of people to see it in that perspective of the 1920s.
Versus now, absolutely.
100%.
I think I have a board from the 1970s, and that one is particularly has a lot of energy around it. A lot of people will say when they come to my house and they actually use that particular board. I have several of them, and that's the one where everybody says has a particular energy attached to it. And every time I use this board, I'll have like a door slam or something inevitably always happens when I use this thing. And you can almost picture in the 70s that this board was probably sitting in someone's parlor and it was like a fun game. So there shouldn't be anything negative attached to this.
No, I mean, The Exorcist comes out in, 73, and it's not immediate. I mean, sales go up. They talk about it at Parker Brothers that sales went up 15% after The Exorcist. But I think what's interesting is because it's such a subliminal scene that they don't talk about, people see it in the theater and then years later go to a party where someone pulls a Ouija out. That's when they're like, no, I'm not touching it. Or, or don't use it alone, whatever. So it takes a very long time. People come to the museum today and will tell me how much they love horror movies, how they've watched The Exorcist a dozen times. And then they'll ask me, are you sure there's a Ouija board in that movie? So the fact that you could watch a movie 12 times and not notice the Ouija board tells me most people don't recall that being in there. So subliminal after that, for sure.
I don't recall that being in there.
Yeah, it's the only reference to Captain Howdy. So she's in the basement playing ping pong by herself and the paddle, and the mother's doing laundry. She pulls it out. It's literally less than 2 minutes, and they never come back to it in the movie and say that's what caused everything.
Has it been in any other movies since?
Oh, the Ouija board? Yeah.
I'm sure like now, but I mean.
Oh, yeah. We have a database going, and there's over 500 horror movies that have put the Ouija board in it. And then, of course, non-horror movies like I Love Lucy and Dennis the Menace, shows from the 50s and stuff. But the very
Wait, this was in I Love Lucy too?
There's an episode called The Seance, and they use it in there. But going back to silent films, it's in there. But interesting enough, the very first talking horror movie is called The Terror, and it's from 1928, and there's a Ouija scene in that movie. So horror movies and Ouija boards literally go hand in hand from the very beginning.
And that's all stemmed from the spiritualist movement.
Yeah, I mean, the spiritualist movement is where these boards start coming out and becoming popular. But once they're getting mass produced, these guys, they're able to get it into a lot of people's hands. People want to use it, and certainly Fold popularizes it beyond anyone. To get it everywhere. So, and with no competition. I mean, you ask 1,000 people to name a second brand of talking board, everyone's going to go, what's a talking board? And then you say, well, name another type of Ouija. And they're all going to say another type. So, it really is the most popular board there is by far.
The only people that sell it now is like local occult bookstores, and I know that is it Kmart used to sell it, but Walmart?
Yeah, Walmart and Target will have it. The problem, I think, what happens is Hasbro owns the trademark for Ouija, so it's a trademark name, and they don't really manufacture, store, or transit the board anymore. They just license it to other companies, and so in the last 2 years, there have been 8 different boards that have been produced. They've done them for Wednesday, The Exorcist, Beetlejuice, 2 at the Five Below stores, a Salem edition, a wooden edition, and the classic edition. But what happens is, if you know anything about retail, is that the companies buy the space on the shelf. The grocery store, when you go on, there's like all this ketchup. It's because they've paid to have that on the shelf there. So at Walmart or Target, things like that, these companies they license to don't have those agreements. So they're not going to see them on the shelf consistently. When they make one for, Stranger Things, yeah, that was sold in Target, in Walmart and stuff. But in general, I think you don't see them on the shelf in the big stores anymore because the people they're licensing it to don't have those contracts to have them on the shelf.
So I know some stores, like I know Goodwill is one of them.
Mhm.
They won't sell them.
Yeah, well, yeah, they don't. Yeah,
I
but I
don't know
mean,
what happens. They must throw them away or something if somebody donates. So
yeah.
listeners out there, don't donate your Ouija board to
Savers
Goodwill.
will have them. Salvation Army will have them. And I don't know if it's I don't know if it's a if every Goodwill won't. Actually, no, that's not true because my friend Natalie picked up a couple boards for me. A couple of the Wednesday boards were at Goodwill. So I think
Maybe they didn't know what they were at the
I
time or
think they don't.
something.
Yeah, I think they maybe they try not to carry them, but at the end of the day, the people I've met who have been most against Ouija boards at the flea market and stuff, as soon as you tell them that you can make some money off of selling them, usually they come around and start selling them.
Penny says it's interesting that Toys R Us used to sell them.
Yeah, I mean, I think people get really caught up on the fact that it's a game, and it is a game. It's patented as a game, and it's sold as a game. But the main reason it's a game, that's how it's taxed. It went to court in 1920, and the court ruled the board to be a game, and so that's the main reason it is.
So you have two locations. You have the Baltimore location and you have the Salem location. Tell me about the plaque that you worked on to get installed. I think it was a Walgreens.
Probably the 7-Eleven. Yeah, in
7-Eleven,
Baltimore.
that's it.
Yeah. So back in 1890, Helen's at a seance. She asked the unnamed board what it wants to be called. It spells back Ouija. Today, that is now condominiums with a 7-Eleven on the first floor. And 11 years ago now, 11 years ago, we worked with the mayor's office to celebrate the 125th anniversary of the Ouija being named in Baltimore. So we originally went to the condo association and we asked them, could we put a plaque on the outside of the building? And they said, absolutely not. We don't want a bunch of weirdos coming around with taking photographs of them. But luckily, the guy that owned the 7-Eleven was on the condo association, and he pulled us to the back of the room. He was like, you know what? You can put the plaque inside my store. So we got permission from corporate 7-Eleven to have a plaque hung up. And it's pretty large. It tells you this is where the Ouija was named, who was there, how it happened. And so that's how it came about.
It's I love that story, actually. You guys work on stuff like that all the time, right?
We do. I think it seems that like a lot of this is headstones. Like for Helen, we put in the headstone for Elijah, but it's kind of whatever the project comes up. We also did the world's largest Ouija board. Rick Schreck, who's the VP of the TBHS, he built it in New Jersey. 99 sheets of plywood. Each sheet was 4 feet by 8 feet and weighed 70 pounds. The planchette was 15 feet across, 400 pounds, and that broke the world record back in 2019. We unveiled that in the Salem Commons the same year that I opened the museum. Yeah, so we do whatever project comes to us that we all get behind. We're 5 directors throughout the United States, and it's whatever we have an idea for. And right now we have a couple, but they're far off. They're a lot more planning behind the scenes, but hopefully we'll be doing more of these dedications and bringing more awareness of the stories we think are interesting.
Is there any association between a Ouija board and like a crime of some sort?
Well, I mean, there have been stories of people using the Ouija board and then, going and killing people and things like that. But for a crime, I guess the funny one that comes to my mind, I don't know if this fits the story or not, but there was a jury in the UK back in 2015, and they consulted the Ouija to come up with the verdict for a murder trial. They tried to reach the murder victim to find out if the person on trial was their person or not. They found him guilty. The judge found out after the fact, threw the case out. They retried him. They found him guilty again. But that they used the Ouija to kind of help come up with that verdict.
I would have never even thought about that. Yeah. Not in a million years. I did not expect you to say that. I was expecting you to say, yeah, there was this kid and the Ouija told him to go.
Well, there are other stories like, in El Cerrito in El Cerrito, California, in 1920, a little girl was hit by a car, hit and run. And the family used the Ouija to try to figure out who might have done it. And it told them that it was some neighbors. They started bringing the neighbors over to the house, had these like 24-hour seances. They wouldn't give them any food or water, and they kept them there for a couple days. Eventually, the police had to break down the door, and all 11 people were eventually committed to a mental institution. And they tried to inspect everyone in town, and then the state of California tried to ban the sale of Ouija boards, and that was 1920. So they're using the Ouija to help solve who did this hit and run. Yeah.
And this was in the 20s, 1920s.
Yeah, 1920, El Cerrito. Yeah.
Is there any strange stories associated with Hollywood using these boards?
Yeah, I mean, I think, well, for stories, hopefully this fits the bill. I don't know. So I have a board in the museum called the Mantic Message Mat. It's a really large, like 24-inch round circle board with a double alphabet. So you use it sitting across from someone, and the alphabet's not always upside down to that person. But that board came from the estate of a woman named Geraldine Saunders, and she was the first female cruise ship director. In the 70s, she wrote a book called The Love Boats, which became the TV show The Love Boat. She had a really fascinating life. She was married to a guy named Sidney Omar, this astrologist of the stars. She was engaged to a guy named John Decker, who was a B-movie actor, who was in like Hercules versus the Cyclops, all these pretty great B films. But she found him hanging dead in the shower, bound and gagged, all these hypodermic needles in his arms, all this derogatory stuff written in red lipstick all over his body, and the police ruled it a suicide. She passed away just a couple of years ago, and I met the person about all of her occult and astrology books. He found 13 of these boards, and so within 48 hours, I was in Burbank, California, purchasing 12 of the 13 boards. So Geraldine Saunders, who created the Love Boat, she was behind this group of psychic researchers who made a board. Yeah.
Do you think she was trying to use the boards to contact whatever happened?
I don't know how she used it. I met her niece, who gave me some insight, about her life, but I can't say how she used the board. But I think she was part of this psychic research group in California, and so she certainly believed in being able to use the boards. So I wouldn't be surprised if she did use it for that, but I don't know for sure.
See, I can imagine somebody like that, or maybe even like the lady from the Winchester house. I forget her name, but she seems like somebody that would have had one too, just from what was going on in her house.
Yeah, you would think. I don't know of her using a Ouija, but certainly, trying to communicate with any spirits that were in the house, she was doing. But I'm not too familiar with the Ouija. I've been there before, but I'm not too familiar as to her ever trying to use a Ouija.
Are there any stories? I'm just trying to ask for like some of the stories because they're just so fascinating to me. Are there any stories associated with like cults?
I don't have a quick answer for that I can off the top of my head. The one that comes to mind is I have a board in the museum. I'm just drawing a blank because you caught me off guard. But it's weird. It's got it's not just the alphabet. It's got all these words that are spelled out. It's got all these phrases. And when I looked them up, the company that made it, I was researching them, and I found out that they're still around today, this group. But when I find clips on YouTube, they seem to be like motivational speakers. Like they're almost like a Susan Powter kind of like, you go to a corporate job and you kind of motivate the sales team kind of thing. But in those videos, they had people like doing trust falls and things like that. And it just reminded me of a cult. I'm not saying they're a cult, but it definitely reminded me of a cult that they were using these boards in that way as more of like self-help motivation kind of things. Yeah.
It's a little weird.
Yeah.
I could see where you would come up with it. Truthfully, I find a lot of those self-help groups kind of cultish anyway.
Yeah, that's why I say it that way.
A lot of them are a little weird.
Yeah, definitely. Heaven's Gate, it seems along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Very interesting. Okay, so what can someone expect whenever they come to your museum?
I think, it's unlike most museums, which is kind of like pay money, go look at a bunch of things and leave. I mean, I am in Salem almost every day. I rarely take a day off, and you're going to meet me. I'm going to tell you a bunch of stories. Not just the history and where it comes from, but I'm going to really try to cater it to what you're interested in. Some people might really be just into spiritualism. Some people might be into like the litigation with the patent or trademark. Some people might want to just talk about pop culture and music and movies with the board. And so I tell a baseline of stories, and then I really kind of cater it specifically to what I think you're interested in hearing about. And I think that's not like most museums. You can stay pretty much until you run out of questions or I run out of stories. But I think people come back often to see, to hear stories they didn't hear the first time. They've been 3-4 times, and they're like, how have I been here this many times and not heard all your stories? But also to see if I still have the same motivation and excitement that I do talking about these stories for so long. But yeah.
Do you have like a cleansing station inside the museum for those who believe that these are gateways to some other world that lets spirits in?
Well, I mean, there's a board for people to use, but as far as like just coming into that space and then leaving and not touching anything, no, I don't. I don't have anything like that. If I've had people, do the cross. I've had people like say a prayer, like a little quick blessing before they came in or when they left, things like that, but not an actual like saging area or anything like that. No.
What is your most favorite object in the museum?
There's a lot. I mean, it's to me, it's like Sophie's Choice because I've really been obsessed to collect these things and hunt them down. But I think that the boards that have great memories of being with my friends or, an adventure we had to get them. So one of those stories is a metal board from 1933 called the Electric Mystifying Oracle. And they tried to sell it for $5, which was, way too much money during the Great Depression. Regular Ouija board cost about $1.50. So basically they ended up scrapping the boards, using them for the war effort. So today we're up to 9 boards and 5 planchettes that still exist. And Murch ended up hunting down Hubert Fuld, who was the president of Ouija back in 1933. He met him on his deathbed. He was on hospice care. He went to go interview him, and Hubert was lying in bed. Murch brought the board, handed it to him, and Hubert took it and smiled and handed it right back. He was like, I never want to see that again. He hadn't seen the board for close to 70 years, but he was reminded that, he almost ruined the family business. He basically said that the failure was justified. He shouldn't have messed with the success of the Ouija. So in 1933, they actually had 3 factories in Baltimore producing Ouija boards, 3 different factories. So it's not that people didn't want to use Ouija. They didn't want to spend the $5 for something they get for $1.50. So that is kind of like my grail. When it came up for sale, it was part of a huge collection in Florida. The old collector having health issues, he wouldn't sell one item. He had to buy everything, which was roughly around 300 boards. And within 2 hours, I secured the funding. I rented a car. I picked up Murch in downtown Boston on a Friday at 5 o'clock. We both drove 21 hours straight down to buy the boards. As we were driving there, other collectors were trying to make their own deal, and I wasn't sure if they were going to actually like still honor the deal when I got down there. And because I got the car last minute, they didn't have a minivan. They gave me a Ford Escalade, so I looked like a pretty high roller showing up down there. We're going to check everything off this list. This guy's not going to rip me off at all. And when we got down there, the guy couldn't have been nicer. He was, I forgot, here's 30 planchettes, here's a bunch of boards. And Murch and I were seeing things that we didn't know existed anymore. A lot of the ephemera, the original mailing envelopes. So we're super excited. We changed gears. We're like, all right, new game plan. Let's just get out of here before this guy changes his mind. And we hadn't slept in 2 days. We worked all day Friday, drove 21 hours straight. We've been up for 2 days, but we're giddy, But at the same time, we're laughing like, we got a truck full of Ouija boards. If we get an accident right now, there's going to be Ouija boards all over the highway. And this is definitely going to be the most paranormal investigative place in America. But for me, it was a once in a lifetime opportunity to own something so rare. So that's my favorite board because of the adventure I had getting it and looking for it for so long.
So it's more the stories behind each piece in the museum for you. 100%. I think you told me about a teacup or something too. I remember the story for that.
Another adventure with Murch. There was a guy named James Merrill who, son of the guy that started Merrill Lynch, billionaire guy, a billionaire son of a billionaire, whatever. And he was a writer and a poet who had writer's block. So he was looking for inspiration. So he ended up making his own talking board, writing it out, putting punctuation on it. He used a teacup with upside down in the handle as the pointer. And he wrote a giant book of poetry over 20 years, 560-page epic poem. It won a Pulitzer Prize. And I have a teacup from that set. Murch and I were able to meet a guy named Peter, who was good friends with James. And being in his house, he told us such amazing stories of about their friendship and everything. And really remarkable stories that I don't think the average person gets to hear. But Murch and I were there for about 5 hours getting these stories. And at the end of the conversation, Peter handed Murch and I both a teacup. And he said, James and I use these. So the teacup is really one of my favorite items in the museum, because not just my adventures with Murch, but really it's just a reminder that, I get a lot of opportunities to talk about the Ouija board, meet people because of Ouija boards, travel because of Ouija boards. So Murch always makes a statement in his presentations that the Ouija is more about the living than the dead. The dead aren't buying Ouija boards. And to me, I totally agree with that, but it really is the opportunities and adventure I get to have because of the Ouija.
So what is your next adventure before we end our conversation? What do you have coming up, and what are you working on?
I'm gearing up for a busy season here. July 4th to Thanksgiving, I don't take a day off. I work 7 days a week for the last 7 years I've had the museum. So I'm gearing up for really just being there every day, extended hours, and getting into the busy season of Salem. And then the TBHS has some things on the back on the burners. We have to get permission on some things and whatnot. So there's always something going on in the background. I'm always working on something. I just updated the website and put up, 500 Ouija boards from the collection. I'm starting to slowly photograph the collection and do that. But yeah, gearing up to be at the museum every day is probably my biggest thing going on.
Well, John, I want to thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it. And thank you again for the magazine. You did such a great job with it. And I'm happy to talk about Ouija boards anytime. So thank you.
There is one more thing. What is the website for the museum?
Salem Witch Board Museum.com. And then, of course, all the socials, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, that stuff. And Salem Witch Board Museum.com. That can link you to everything.
And so if they want to contact you to maybe buy an old board or anything, like they just want to go to the museum, they just show up to the museum?
Yep. It's just show up. It's, there's no timed entrance or nothing like that. I kind of bounce around when it gets really busy and tell different stories and gather people to hear stories and then splinter off and do things. So no advance tickets, nothing like that. Just show up. And if you can't make it, then, check out the website.
Well, John, thanks again.
My pleasure. Thank you.
You've been listening to The Gateway, broadcast live from United Public Radio Network 107.7 FM, New Orleans. I want to thank my guest, John Kozik, for being on the show. Again, you can find him. I'll link his website to my Facebook page in a little bit. Also, I am going to link the video as well. I'll post the video that I was talking about earlier in the show. And I just want to say special thank you to everyone who works at 107.7 FM New Orleans for making this show happen, everyone at United Public Radio Network, and it's a great network of people. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a fellow traveler of Strange and Unexplained. Until next time, I'll see you on down the road.